what I will say of this virus. I think we're in the middle of a massive experiment worldwide. And
where's the guinea pigs?
Maybe the experiment is, will people listen to scientists?
Hey everybody. So I hope you're staying sane out there, first and foremost. The other night we watched 12 Monkeys again for the first time in a really long time.
There's the television. It's all right there. All right there. Look, listen, Neil, Brad. Commercials. We're not productive anymore. At least to make things anymore. It's all automated. What are we for then? We're consumers.
Especially in uncertain times. In response to the recent world events, we're taking steps to protect our family with Hyundai Assurance. When you buy or lease a new Hyundai between now and April 30th, we'll cover your payments for up to 6 months in the event you lose your job this year due to COVID-19.
Okay, buy a lot of stuff, you're a good citizen. But if you don't buy a lot of stuff, if you don't, what are you then, I ask you? What? Mentally ill.
And it was just really strange because the next day when I got up, my daughter was talking about how they're actually letting animals out of the zoo and they're letting them wander around since there's no people in there. They're letting penguins go on field trips now at the zoo.
Yeah, it's very 12 Monkeys, which we incidentally just rewatched, and man, that movie is spot on. I mean, it applies to a lot of stuff. What was that sound?
That's the penguin walking around the zoo.
Do you know what crazy is? Crazy is majority rules. Yeah, take germs, for example. In the 18th century, no such thing. Semmelweis comes along. He's trying to convince people, well, other doctors mainly, that there are these teeny tiny invisible bad things called germs that get into your body and make you sick. He's trying to get doctors to wash their hands. What is this guy? Crazy?
Take steps to lower your risk of getting sick. Wash your hands often with soap and water.
We've talked about things before about washing your hands.
He's trying to get doctors to wash their hands. What is this guy? Crazy?
Every morning when I wake up, I wash my hands. Then I have some food, and then I wash my hands. Then I take a shower, wash my hands, and then wash my hands. And then Mommy tells me my hands are clean. And then I wash and wash and wash my hands.
Wash your hands for 40 seconds, please. Soap will chase the germs away so you don't cough and sneeze.
To wash their hands.
Then I touch a football, and I wash and wash and wash and wash. And I watch my sister washing her hands, and I get an idea to wash my hands. And I wash and wash and wash, but I never get clean. The shame never seems to scrub off.
What is this guy? Crazy?
That's always the toughest enemy, the invisible enemy. But
teeny tiny invisible. What do you call them? Germs? Huh? What?
And then it was like a couple days later, all these articles started coming out about how there's an unlikely beneficiary of the coronavirus. It's the planet, and how there's the beautiful side effects of the corona pandemic, and that would be us not harming the planet anymore by our daily existence that harms the planet. And look at the blue skies and the clear canals of Venice because no one's there. And it's just, it's basically 12 Monkeys. It's pretty much straight out of that film.
Now, cut to the 20th century. Last week, as a matter of fact, right before I dropped into this hellhole, I go in, to order a burger in this fast food joint. The guy drops it on the floor. He picks it up, he wipes it off, he hands it to me like it was all okay. What about the germs, I say? He says, I don't believe in germs. Germs is just a plot they made up so they can sell you disinfectants and soaps. Now, he's crazy. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's only popular opinion.
I think the good news / bad news is, there's a lot of fear circulating right now. People are very concerned about what will happen. I think it's important to digest the idea that this is very much a means to an end. It's not the end unto itself. I have a hard time believing it was unforeseen and all that.
I just say this, we have an invisible enemy. We have a problem that a month ago nobody ever thought about.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago.
A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia.
We have a problem that a month ago nobody ever thought about.
I don't think anybody could have predicted.
But that's not even the point. You know, it's the reaction, it's the response to this that really, I think, is the real purpose here. And the standstill of human behavior, yeah, they're going to say things like, look how good for the earth and the environment. I don't believe those are sincere feelings either. It seems very disingenuous. This has everything to do with the same usual suspects, big corporations who pollute the earth so many times over and then blame it on human behavior. Now they're blaming human behavior for this and, you know, basically putting us in our places, because what this is really about is an upgrade or an altogether new management system of humanity.
That's the thing about COVID-19. It doesn't care about how rich you are, how famous you are. It's the great equalizer. What's terrible about it is it's made us all equal in many ways. And what's wonderful about it is that it's made us all equal in many ways.
And so we came across this article and it just made us kind of stop dead in our tracks, because we've been talking about a lot of these things for a very long time. We did the short documentary Obsolete back in 2016.
I'm going to be applying for benefits.
Yes, you can.
Are you going to sit by and wait for the government to just take care of you?
We've been reporting on the Bilderberg meetings, especially the ones that really caught our eye was 2018. If you don't want to be on this system, I'm not sure how you do anything. And that's what they make it sound like. It's mandatory. They say it's mandatory. And even when they say it's not mandatory, they say it's unimaginable to live in that country without this, because everything is done through it and on it. 2019, I think not surprisingly, 2 years that it was hardly covered by anyone, including independent media at all. We've been saying for years now, but there's got to be a catalyst if they want to get everyone onto these new digital management systems. You can't just bring all this stuff in. People aren't going to go for it. As you can see, everything has changed in a week, and the justification under the old adage, never let a good crisis go to waste.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
Is just here, and it's perfectly aligned with all of these agendas. And so while everybody is freaking out and buying all the toilet paper and panic buying the grocery stores and just trying to figure out how they're going to get through the next couple of months, we are looking at this in terms of what kind of power is going to be taken from this situation, because none of these crises that happen ever are put to waste, right? I mean, look at what happened after the September 11th attacks and how much privacy was eroded, rights were eroded, how many systems of control were put into place, and how much more technology has merged with our lives since then that has enabled kind of that whole situation as well. It's very pronounced when you look back on it. I mean, that's kind of what 2020 is. It's all this hindsight is 2020. I keep saying that lately because now that I'm seeing this, all these things that I wasn't sure about before are kind of clicking together like a puzzle. And all of that came together on Tuesday when I came across this MIT Technology Review article, which was written by Gideon Litchfield, who's the editor-in-chief over there. We're not going back to normal. Social distancing is here to stay for much more than a few weeks. It will upend our way of life in some ways forever. And I think everybody needs to read this MIT article and see what it is that is being proposed here for how society is going to be managed as this thing plays out that we're seeing now.
Yeah, and that author, he did 16 years at The Economist, and he's been part of a number of high-level papers. I think he was a co-founder of Quartz, and he's also from the London School of Economics. So keep that in mind, with the sort of transparent agenda at play here. I'm not saying he's directing that agenda whatsoever, but he's sort of channeling through this article. And also, this article, which I agree is very key, and that's why we're going to read through it pretty thoroughly. It's based in large part on the paper just put out a few days ago, March 16th, 2020, from the Imperial College London, with the lead author Neil M. Ferguson. And he deals with epidemiology, that's, the science of the spread of diseases. But what he's really been doing for the past several decades, and he's written hundreds of papers, he does the modeling on the spreading of diseases. He's done retrospective studies of the 1918 flu pandemic. He's modeled factors of disease outbreaks, and really what it gets down to is he has predicted and modeled the acceptable levels, from the academic standpoint, of poverty and death in a future influenza pandemic. That's the title, actually, of one of his papers from 2006. And he modeled out earlier versions of coronavirus. He did earlier versions with H1N1, a lot of the animal disease outbreaks. And he has paper titles like Capturing Human Behavior. They're very much looking at what differences in human behavior will stop these diseases. But now he's written, along with, 20 co-authors or something, Report 9, Impact of Non-Pharmaceutical Interventions to Reduce COVID-19 Mortality and Healthcare Demand. And that's not excluding a vaccine or other treatments. It's just this is focused on the social distancing and how to shut down society and why it's okay to accept extreme sort of economic sanctions in the name of controlling these diseases. So all of this has profound implications for human behavior under the sort of cover of COVID-19 and its spread.
So we're just going to read through this and discuss it. It says, to stop coronavirus, we will need to radically change almost everything we do. How we work, exercise, socialize, shop, manage our health, educate our kids, take care of our family members. We all want things to go back to normal quickly, but what most of us have probably not yet realized, yet will soon, is that things won't go back to normal after a few weeks or even a few months. Some things never will. It's now widely agreed, even by Britain finally, that every country needs to flatten the curve. And you guys have probably heard that phrase a lot lately too. Impose social distancing to slow the spread of the virus so that the number of people sick at once doesn't cause the healthcare system to collapse, as it is threatening to do in Italy right now. That means the pandemic needs to last at a low level until either enough people have had COVID-19 to leave most immune, assuming immunity lasts for years, which we don't know, or there's a vaccine. And before I continue, BBC was actually reporting people who had tested positive for corona, had been to the hospital, and then were released with a negative test, were retesting positive.
Health officials in China say around 14% of patients who had the coronavirus but recovered have tested positive again. The same phenomenon has been reported in Japan, where a woman in her 40s tested positive for a second time after being released from hospital. Officials in both countries have said they are still learning about this new virus.
Continuing, how long would it take and how draconian do social restrictions need to be? I love how they just go straight to the word draconian. Yesterday, President Donald Trump, announcing new guidelines such as a 10-person limit on gatherings, said that with several weeks of focused action, we can turn the corner and turn it quickly. In China, 6 weeks of lockdown are beginning to ease now that new cases have fallen to a trickle. But it won't end there. As long as someone in the world has the virus, breakouts can and will keep recurring without stringent controls to contain them. In a report yesterday, researchers at Imperial College London proposed a way of doing this. Impose more extreme social distancing measures every time admissions to ICUs start to spike and relax them each time admissions fall. Here's how that looks in a graph. And what they're showing is this chart that basically shows they're going to have to do these periods of isolation and social distancing as this spikes and goes back down over and over again, and this chart lasts until the end of 2021. It says the orange line is ICU admissions. Each time they rise above a threshold, say 100 per week, the country would close all schools, most universities adopt social distancing. When they drop below 50, those measures would be lifted, but people with symptoms or whose family members have symptoms would still be confined at home. What counts as social distancing? These researchers define it as all households reduce contact outside the household, school, or workplace by 75%. That doesn't mean you get to go out with your friends once a week instead of 4 times. It means that everyone does everything they can to minimize social contact, and overall, the number of contacts falls by 75%. And we've already seen in Kansas, they've shut down schools for the rest of the year.
Families all across Kansas are looking for answers after that announcement late this afternoon that students will not be going back to school after spring break. Good evening, I'm Deb Ferris.
And I'm Craig DeGrelli. The Wichita school superintendent only had a few hours notice about the rest of the school year, but insists there will be firm plans soon.
And they have moved education in the state of Kansas to what they're calling a continuous education model, which is the kind of model that would go perfect with this type of social distancing schedule that they're talking about here. It says under this model, the researchers conclude social distancing and school closures would need to be enforced some 2/3 of the time, 2 months on and 1 month off, until a vaccine is available, which will take at least 18 months. They note that the results are qualitatively similar for the U.S. And before I continue on that, I just want to point out that yesterday, so that came out on, this article I'm reading you came out on the 17th. The very next day, it came out in the New York Times that the U.S. virus plan anticipates an 18-month pandemic and widespread shortage situation. And it says a federal government plan to combat the coronavirus warned policymakers last week that a pandemic will last 18 months or longer and could include multiple waves, resulting in widespread shortages that could strain consumers in the nation's healthcare system. And it's a 100-page plan. They have not released it to the public. It was actually marked, it was unclassified, but it was actually marked for official use only, not for public distribution or release, but they did give it to the New York Times, and they're not saying anything else. But the idea that it says that the pandemic could last 18 months and have multiple waves fits perfectly with this chart right here. And the idea that it's going to be 18 months and then it's going to come in waves. I mean, that's where they're obviously getting it from.
And obviously part of that number is tied to the idea that they're going to have this great vaccine in that time. And their faith in that vaccine is deeply unsettling because they've already taken so many strong-armed, almost totalitarian maneuvers. And basically they're saying we're going to be better off the more that we're socially isolated, the less that we're able to be human. And the parallels, you know, everyone's thinking of this in medical terms as an outbreak, but it really is just a new psychological attack on society because they're remolding it. This is really about reshaping society, and it's in the headline, just as you said. The headline itself, we're not going back to normal. When did they use that kind of talk? After 9/11, when they said this is the new normal.
There was this phrase after 9/11 of the new normal. I never liked that phrase. Insofar as I could define it, it was, well, things cannot and will not be the same.
Things are never going to return to the way that they were. And the way to defeat the terrorism is to sacrifice your freedoms, even though that's what the terrorists supposedly hate.
It is now my honor to sign into law the USA Patriot Act of 2001.
So is this the new normal until the height of the summer? We'll see what happens.
You know, you lose your freedoms, you do what you're told, and things get more iron-fisted all the time, you know.
See it, say it, sort it.
If you see something, say something. Report suspicious activity to local authorities.
The level of measures that they're taking on this.
Well, we're about to get to those measures because it talks about it in here. But if you look at this chart that goes through the end of 2021 showing this rise and fall in social distancing that they're going to have to do to, quote, keep the pandemic in check. I mean, this looks like an experimental schedule is what it looks like. I mean, this is how they're going to dole out this thing. And after you go through enough rounds of this, you're going to be conditioned. This is a conditioning schedule, conditioning everyone to this new
You mean in Pavlovian
type
terms?
of situation. I absolutely do mean in total Pavlovian
It's
terms.
like
This
B.F.
is
Skinner and his pigeon
100%.
training box.
Absolutely.
Pavlovian training turns this duck into an entertainer and a threat to Carmen Cavallaro.
So by the time they get everyone to go through this many rounds of this, I think a lot of people are going to be willing to do whatever it takes to not have to continue doing that. So they're going to bring people to a point after going through this for, I mean, this is as much psychological, this level of quote-unquote social distancing. Don't you like how they have a whole new phrase for it? I mean, going through that this many times, I mean, can you imagine the cabin fever that people are going to experience and everything else? I mean, this is a conditioning schedule for that. And I think after it's over, people are going to be willing to accept an awful lot more draconian measures just to make that stop, you know? So continuing, and they get into a little bit about what they're proposing, and that this is the point that we want to get to here. So first they go through all the ways that it has to be this way and why other ways won't work. So it says 18 months, ! Surely there must be other solutions. Why not just build more ICUs and treat more people at once? Well, in the researchers' model, that didn't solve the problem. Without social distancing of the whole population, they found that even the best mitigation strategy, which means isolation or quarantine of the sick, the old, and those who have been exposed, plus school closures, would still lead to a surge of critically ill people 8 times bigger than the US or UK system can cope with. And that's the lowest blue curve in this graph here. The flat red line is the current number of ICU beds. It says even if you set factories to churn out beds and ventilators and all the other facilities and supplies, you would still need far more nurses and doctors to take care of everyone. It says, how about imposing restrictions for just one batch of 5 months or so? It says that's no good either, because once the measures are lifted, the pandemic will break out all over again, only this time it'll be in winter, which is the worst time for overstretched healthcare systems. And then it says, and what if we just decide to be brutal and set the threshold number of ICU admissions for triggering social distancing much higher, accepting that many more patients would die? Turns out it makes little difference. Even in the least restrictive of the Imperial College scenarios, we're shut in more than half the time. It says this isn't a temporary disruption. It's the start of a completely different way of life. So, and they call it living in a state of pandemic. So it says in the short term, this will be hugely damaging to businesses that rely on people coming together in large numbers. Restaurants, cafes, bars, nightclubs, gyms, hotels, theaters, cinemas, art galleries, shopping malls, craft fairs, museums, musicians, performers, conferences, sporting things, cruise lines, airlines, public transportation, schools, all this stuff. That's to say nothing of the stresses on parents thrust into homeschooling their kids, people trying to care for elderly relatives without exposing them to the virus, people trapped in abusive relationships, and anyone without a financial cushion to deal with swings in income, which is a large majority of people in this country. We're living paycheck to paycheck. I don't think this country's alone in that at all. I think that they've been lowering the standards of living for a really long time, and especially since the 2007-2008 economic crisis.
I think that's been studied probably for many decades, but I've been very cognizant of it at least since the 2008 financial crisis. It's a huge a majority of this country is living paycheck to paycheck, and they know it, and they know that makes people very easy to break. And here we are, you know, it's fragile, it's brittle, and they want more control.
Well, I mean, and they're already talking about bringing in UBI, Universal Basic Income. They're not calling it that, of course, but it's something that they wouldn't even have been able to do in this country before.
The administration calling for 2 rounds of payments, the first to start going out April 6th, the second 6 weeks later.
Conservatives before would have never gone for the kinds of things they're going for now, but because of this situation being so catastrophic economically, now they've got bipartisan support just straight away. Everyone's just totally agreeing. We're going to give everyone checks. We're going to give everyone money. But at first, this money's going to be, you know, quote unquote free, right? They're just going to dump it into everyone's accounts. But in the future, this kind of money could very easily come with strings attached, and those strings could include things like, did you get your vaccine? I mean, this is something that we talked about extensively in the film Obsolete, and there were a lot of people who were angry about that film because they felt like the information in there was kind of depressing. But it's just not something you can put a bow on and in a puppy dog, you know, dancing around, frolicking on a hill. It is what it is. It's what's happening. You either want to know about it or you don't. And I think it's really interesting, too, that in the lead up to this, you had Andrew Yang running for president. And it's funny because I was in the middle of recording a totally different video before all this happened. I'm still going to put that out, but it's, you know, it has nothing to do with any of this. And I mentioned in there specifically that people like Yang don't run for president because they actually think they're going to be president. They're
sticking a message out.
They run for president to inject an idea into the mass consciousness. So his platform was run on UBI. And when you have someone like that running on a platform like that nationally, then what you can do is you can not only inform everybody about this idea, but you can take a poll and kind of see how many people would be on board with such a thing. It's one of those kind of situations. And so I heard he works for CNN now. That dude never thought he was going to be president. This was about injecting that idea. And I think that's really interesting timing considering, I mean, it's one of those hindsight is 2020 things once again. I mean, it's really interesting that we just had that and now we have this situation where essentially this is the start of basically a UBI kind of test because they're going to give everyone this money. They're already saying it's going to be twice. Now I've heard it's going to be even longer than that depending on what the situation holds. We haven't even seen anything yet is what they're saying about this, and we're already to the level we're at. So I'm just saying there are lots of reasons why UBI is not a good deal. And I know a lot of people are just thinking, well, it's free money. But see, the thing is now people have been brought economically to their knees. And so what better time to institute something like that than at a time when people will feel like they don't have any other option. It's diabolical. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically an energy transfer. It has to do with who's the mediator of the source of energy for your life. I mean, money as a metaphor for energy, you know, you independently get that from your job. Even if you hate your job and you're just doing the 9 to 5, you're bringing those resources in for yourself. There's all the energy you get from your social interactions, your social life. I mean, at the heart of it, we're social creatures, and they're cutting that off. It's a huge shock to that system, and you can't, you know, you don't have the same capacity you had anyway to get your independent money energy, but now you got to get it from the centralized source. Well, where does that power go? To whoever's handing that out.
Yeah, and whatever stipulations they want to put on that money in the future for you to be able to have it, whatever hoops they make people jump through to get it. And that's going to be part of this, I do believe. I've always said that. And when we talked about Obsolete back in 2016 and the UBI, you know, we were talking about how there's going to have to be some kind of massive catalyst to get people on this because they couldn't. I mean, there were all these countries. There have been all these countries since we put that movie out, in fact, who have been running UBI tests in their country worldwide. There have been all these countries since we put that documentary out that have been running UBI tests in their country worldwide, and we never had an officially government-sanctioned UBI test here in America because I personally don't think you could have gotten one side of the political aisle to agree to it. But what we did have here was Sam Altman and his startup Y Combinator, who attended Bilderberg, and they conducted a pilot study in Oakland, California, where they gave people UBI payments between $1,000 and $2,000, which is exactly what's being argued right now in Congress, how much they're going to give people. It looks like it's going to be $1,200, but it was at one point the Democrats were saying $2,000 and Romney was saying $1,000, and it's these same exact numbers of the pilot study that Altman ran in Oakland just a couple years back. So this is something they've been practicing for, is this exact type of scenario now where people are going to be brought to an economic breaking point if they don't take it. So the thing for me is, again, hindsight is 2020. I'll probably say it 12 more times in this video, is we were just thinking, how are they going to make a situation? What would be the catalyst for getting people to accept this, for getting people to take it and get on this program. And now it's pretty obvious what that's about to be, because we're already seeing them calling for it right now. And you have immediate bipartisan support under this crazy situation that we're all in now. So we're living in this state of pandemic. All of these businesses are going to be damaged. A lot of smaller businesses especially are going to be really, really the hardest hit. And all this stuff that's going on with the swings in income and the changing of how we're going to have to run our daily lives. And it says there'll be some adaptation, of course. Gyms could start selling home equipment and online training sessions, for example. We'll see an explosion of new services in what's already been dubbed the shut-in economy. So they already have a name for this. One can also wax hopeful about the way some habits might change. Less carbon-burning travel, more local supply chains, more walking and biking. I mean, there's your green plan again, which, I mean, the fact that this is coming on the heels of everything that XR was saying about how we have to act like the world's on fire and they want to ban people from travel, it's kind of like they got all their whole wish list, didn't they? And right after that whole year of the protests, and now we have this situation, it's kind of ridiculous how timely all of this is. But it says the disruption to many, many businesses and livelihoods will be impossible to manage, and the shut-in lifestyle just isn't sustainable for such long periods. So how can we live in this new world? And I feel like they should have said brave new world.
So it's Monday morning here in DC as we wake up to this brave new world. For those that are self-isolating and self-quarantining and following the CDC guidelines, we thank you.
Because right here, they're going to tell you what they're proposing to do in the future so that we can socialize safely. Now, here's where this all is about to come in. I think for people who have followed this channel, especially those who have been following this channel for the last 4 or 5 years, you're going to know immediately when I read this to you what we've been saying, because here it is, okay? It says part of the answer, hopefully, will be better healthcare systems, pandemic response units that can move quickly to identify and contain outbreaks, more testing kits, the ramping up of production of medical equipment, etc. In the near term, we'll probably find awkward compromises that allow us to retain a semblance of a social life. Maybe movie theaters will take out some of the seats. They'll have spaced out chairs and meeting rooms, stuff like that. Ultimately, however, and here we go, I predict we'll restore the ability to socialize safely by developing more sophisticated ways to identify who is a disease risk and who isn't, and discriminating legally against those who are. And it says we can see harbingers of this in the measures some countries are taking. Israel is right now using cell phone location data with which its intelligence services track terrorists to trace people who've been in touch with carriers of the virus. And Singapore has been doing exhaustive contact tracing and publishing data on every known case, all but identifying people by name. So they're not full-on doxing people, but there's a website in Singapore where you can see every known infection case, where that person lives, where they work, what hospital they were admitted to, and a network topology of carriers that's all laid out on a time series. So they're putting that much information out there.
I notice a lot of people are talking about South Korea because they've done a good job.
Amazing how you keep seeing problems that have nothing to do with each other ending in the same solutions.
Right.
Technological tracking.
And it says, we don't know exactly what this new future looks like, of course, but the editor-in-chief of the MIT Technology Review should know a whole lot about what they've been proposing, because that's what they cover in this publication. So he should know a lot. So when he says, here's what he can imagine, it's not like he's just coming up with this off the top of his head. This is the stuff that they cover. So this is not, when he gets ready to tell you the world that they're imagining, it's not off the top of his head. He says, one can imagine a world in which to get on a flight, perhaps you'll have to be signed up to a service that tracks your movements via your phone. The airline wouldn't be able to see where you'd gone, but it would get an alert if you'd been close to known infected people or disease hotspots. There'd be similar requirements at the entrance to large venues, government buildings, or public transport hubs. There would be temperature scanners everywhere, and your workplace might demand you wear a monitor that tracks your temperature or other vital signs. The system is slowly creeping in all over the place. Here in America, we've already seen companies releasing systems to monitor and track employees throughout their workday.
Future of office life, high-tech tracking devices that can monitor your entire day on the job.
And just like a Fitbit, it's with you all day long. The same ID badge that opens office doors can now track your every move and more.
Where nightclubs ask for proof of age, in the future, they might ask for proof of immunity, an identity card or some kind of digital verification via your phone showing you've already recovered from or been vaccinated against the latest virus strains.
I recently traveled from Shanghai to Wuxi, and it's very interesting how my movements are being tracked. When I landed at Wuxi railway station, I couldn't exit the station unless I showed them where I've been for the past 14 days. So I had to give consent to my telecom operator to access my location for the past 2 weeks. When I got on the taxi, I also had to scan a WeChat mini program that linked my ID with a specific vehicle that I rode in.
Whenever I enter a building or a neighborhood, I will need to show them my Wuxi health code. A green Wuxi health code means that I can move freely within the city. And it will be scanned by the security guard to link me to the place that I'm visiting.
The app explores billions of records in social media postings, commercial and public databases for law enforcement needs, churning out risk profiles in real time using an algorithm. They give you a threat score.
What is red would be a high threat alert, a yellow would be a modest but noteworthy threat alert, and a green is there is no threat alert.
Whenever I enter a building or a neighborhood, I will need to show them my Wuxi health code. A green Wuxi health code means that I can move freely within the city.
And so there you go. And like I said, they are already saying recovered patients from the coronavirus were testing positive again. So it's laying the groundwork for saying you pretty much have to have this vaccine.
I'm also pleased to report today that a vaccine candidate has begun the phase 1 clinical trial.
Today, the United States has tested its very first coronavirus vaccine. It went to a volunteer that you see right here.
This is one of the fastest vaccine development launches in history.
And you have to have proof you've been vaccinated in some sort of digital ID for you to be able to go into these public places.
The end result is they're talking about canceling your right to participate in society, to go in public, etc. And again, I recall Rahm Emanuel talking about beefing up the watch list and basically blurring the lines between the terror watch list and people who can buy guns, using the idea of canceling people's rights to participate in society, to travel, to buy things, to go places.
That is, if you are on the no-fly list because you are known as maybe a possible terrorist, you cannot buy a handgun in America. And it's the right policy. If you're on that no-fly list, your access to the right to bear arms is canceled because you're not part of the American family. There is no right for you if you're on that terrorist list.
And while the problem may be completely different and a different basis, the end result is canceling people's right to participate in society. This is an end run around people's rights. It's a power grab. And,
the likes of which I don't think we've ever seen before in our lifetime.
Because the strongest power grabs are based on threats of the unknown. They're calling this an invisible threat.
We have an invisible enemy. No matter where you look, this is something, it's an invisible enemy. It's the invisible enemy. That's always the toughest enemy, the invisible enemy, but we're going to defeat the invisible enemy.
Yeah, and the fact that he mentioned some kind of digital verification as if he's not even sure what that is kind of mind-boggling to me, because we've all been hearing about it, and I had tabs open on my computer to do a report on this before this even all happened, because there was that disinformation that went around, and I hate to even use the phrase fake news, but it actually was, where they were talking about, ID 2020 is going to be the microchip in a vaccine. No, it's not. That's actually not true. What is true, however, is that ID 2020 can be rolled into this blockchain-backed digital ID that will then be also your verification and proof that you've been vaccinated. That's where vaccines and ID 2020 meet. And so I think we all know they've been beefing up this identification stuff since Real ID. And when the Sustainable Development Goals came out for Agenda 2030, you had number 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. And one of the things underneath that very vague sounding title has to do with this digital ID program that they want to bring in. And by the way, they are referring to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as transforming our world. So they are straight up saying that these goals will transform the world. And you have ID 2020 and how they're saying having this new digital ID that they want everyone on the planet to have by 2030 is what they're calling a fundamental and universal human right, because we live in a digital era, so everyone needs to be able to have that. But when you start looking into ID 2020, you have all the usual suspects that you always have, like the World Bank and all that stuff. You've got Microsoft being a huge part of this, and Bill Gates' Gavi Vaccine Alliance. You actually have Dr. Seth Berkley, CEO of Gavi, as part of this. He joined ID 2020's executive board. Actually, back in 2016, at the United Nations headquarters in New York, ID 2020, it's described as an alliance of governments, nonprofits, academia, over 150 private sector companies, 11 United Nations agencies, and they were collaborating on how to provide this unique digital identity to everyone on the planet. And Microsoft then joined that.
Bill Gates was speaking at a security conference in Europe where, by the way, they're doing all kinds of creepy stuff in the backlash to immigration and terrorism and just the rise of hysteria throughout the whole region. And he talked about how health threats are now interlaced with security threats because the terrorists of tomorrow are going to be using genetic engineering technology and computers to create synthetic viruses.
We also face a new threat that the next epidemic has a good chance of originating on a computer screen of a terrorist intent on using genetic engineering to create a synthetic version of the smallpox virus or a contagious and highly deadly strain of flu.
And they've been rolling it out and unveiling this with all of this refugee crisis that's been going on. So this entire time you have all these war-torn Middle Eastern countries where people are being forced from their homes and forced to live in other countries. And the first thing that those people have to do when that happens to get food and shelter is they have to enroll in this digital ID program. That's part of it.
Uganda is Africa's largest refugee host country. It has been rolling out a biometric data system with the help of the United Nations. The UN says it's logged 1 million people so far, and urban refugees are still being counted.
We're dealing with immigration under the larger auspices of globalization. We've got bankers, capitalists, globalists, and entities that are international in scope who are looking to, quote, leverage human capital migrants across borders, and they're reshaping and re-leveling world order through this process.
Even today, while all of this coronavirus stuff is happening in the news, there were articles coming out even today about how UN is hosting boot camps to spur this digital identity and the humanitarian tech solutions. This is an article that just came out today about this, that they held a digital solutions boot camp together with the United Nations Refugee Agency and the World Food Program about this. There was another article that came out today. Refugees in Ethiopia's camps raise privacy and exclusion concerns over UNHCR's new digital registration. It says, I felt like I was held hostage for food and water. They are forcing people onto this biometric registration system, which is what gives these people access to the services, the aid, and it says here it gives them access to their rights. Those rights, if you read the article that we've been discussing right now, in the future, those rights might be you getting to go to a restaurant, to a nightclub, to get on a train, to get on a plane, to go to a concert. Do you see what I'm saying? They're going to roll this together. And further, it just came out that just yesterday, Bill Gates was addressing coronavirus fears in an Ask Me Anything. And they specifically talked about this, where somebody asked him, how should we determine which businesses stay open? And underneath that, Bill Gates was talking about how eventually we will have to have digital certificates to show who has been recovered or tested recently, or when we have a vaccine and who has received it. So this is all working together in a completely, God, I can't even think of the word I'm trying to use.
If you didn't know better, it would seem like they started with the end result in mind and then came up with a threat, you know.
Because this is all...
If you didn't know better, if you didn't know the facts that we know and weren't focused on the threat to health and to livelihood.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. This is all coming together in some beyond Machiavellian way where the problem reaction solution of this is so perfect.
But you see, again, I mean, people have a constitutional Bill of Rights, freedom of expression, right to peacefully assemble, to redress grievances, to gather in groups, to participate in businesses. And if businesses want to turn you away as private institutions, that's been their prerogative. But basically, it's open to paying customers and the basic terms. But now you've got government and healthcare entities getting involved in who can go to restaurants, who can go out in public, who can attend concert events and sporting events, even though you're paying the ticket price. You're engaged in a contract with that business entity as an individual. How did there come to be this mediary in there? You know, it's this invisible threat. That's why. But people are, the biggest danger is that we're going to lose our heads here as a crisis and just hand over all that power. You know, I've got people who are deeply concerned about issues after 9/11, saw more or less what was happening, but today they're not thinking that way. Today they're thinking maybe the government's not doing enough. We've got to protect our loved ones, those who are vulnerable to this virus, whatever they need to do.
Prepared to do whatever it takes we're doing.
Any amount of power they need. I mean, fine, I don't want anyone to die, but that is dangerous, dangerous thinking. You cannot throw out the baby with the bathwater, and you can't give away the precious jewel of liberty because there's a threat there. You know, who is taking that power? That's what this is really about.
And right before all of this started, there was an article that caught my eye in Market Watch. Silicon Valley's final frontier for payments, the neoliberal takeover of the human body. Because in the future, these kinds of biometric ID systems are going to be your way that you interact in all of society. Everything will be done through these things. Every single thing, you'll be all centrally located in one place. It's going to be basically like Sandra Bullock's The Net. I mean, and it's talking about here how these new biometric technology systems they want to put in, like biometric wallets that are infiltrating every other aspect of our entire lives. It says the next stop is replacing your wallet, and it says that will be removing the last physical barrier. The smartphones, the watches, the credit cards, all of that, it will be removing the last physical barrier between our bodies and corporate America, which will be the final frontier in mobile payments. So this is where this is all headed. And I think it's also very interesting that you see certain narratives coming out about how this crisis situation is being used to further implement agendas, such as in China, where they are burning cash right now. They're disinfecting and destroying cash, supposedly to contain the coronavirus. That was reported
what do you know? Another
month.
Agenda to destroy individual freedom.
Destroying cash, because they were already planning to go cashless anyways. That's the thing. They were already planning to do that anyway. But China was already going to go cashless anyway. This is just facilitating the acceleration of that under the idea that the coronavirus can be spread on physical cash. So we've got to go cashless. But as MIT also reported, coronavirus is not a good argument for it because there's no evidence that it's being spread through the money. There's no evidence of that, even though you had a guy who was a former president of the state-owned Bank of China recently arguing that the central bank in China should speed the release of its planned digital currency as a response to this. So they were already going to go cashless anyway, but now because of this situation, they're going to be able to do it much faster, you see. And that is what I feel like is going on here. Because as soon as you had this article coming out about what they're going to do with this situation and how our lives aren't going back to normal, again, the very next day, you had the New York Times coming out with how the White House has a federal government plan that's warning people that a pandemic will last 18 months or longer. It's going to have multiple waves. It goes right along with it. And at the same time, you have Bill Gates coming out and saying that eventually everyone's going to have some sort of digital certificate to prove that they've either been tested, recovered, they've had a vaccine.
Whenever I enter a building or a neighborhood, I will need to show them my Wuxi health code. A green Wuxi health code means that I can move freely within the city.
It says when we have a vaccine, who has received it.
And that's so creepy.
Really, that's the 18 months. It takes 18 months. If you go look at what our FDA says, it takes 18 months for the testing of the vaccine, which they started on Monday, by the way, already testing this new novel vaccine. It uses technology that is not like any vaccine that we've had yet.
This is one of the fastest vaccine development launches in history.
They're being pretty vague on that one.
And it's so creepy. I mean, we've seen in the last year and a half that anyone dissenting, questioning, standing against vaccines is increasingly shut down online. People have been removed. You're not allowed to sell your products. You're not allowed to talk about it. You can't monetize it. So they've shut down dissent on vaccines. They're going to have a blank check. It is what it is. You must accept it.
Here because,
and if they move forward with this idea of a digital certificate, you either A, got to capitulate to the vaccine, or B, if you do get sick with the virus, assuming you survive it and get over it, obviously you've got to go to a doctor and have that be certified. You're not staying at home until the symptoms are over and like, well, it's done, I'm fine. You've got to go through that system and they have to approve you, and whatever else is on that plate, other vaccines.
It's insane.
They're obviously going to pressure parents with children where there are other vaccines. Maybe that's put them at risk.
I mean, that's what I'm
this
saying.
Is turning the whole thing on its head, and it's really encroaching upon our individual rights yet again. I mean, I guess I'm beating a dead horse, but I'll beat it,
I mean, in a way that is just unprecedented. I mean, all of these people that kept their kids home and homeschooled because they wanted to avoid having to vaccinate their kids, well, now everybody's homeschooling, so that's not going to do it. It's as if somebody put all of these factors into one of those quantum computers and ran a game theory simulation on how to game this entire thing into pushing the entire world onto this system that they have only been talking about putting in place for many years, and that we've been reporting on for many years. All of their data, everything they do, everywhere they go, everything they buy, everything is linked to one card. In 2018, I feel like that was the moment that we were both thinking, okay, something's getting ready to happen. Something's coming. Something is about to happen with all of this. It's pretty clear because this here fits perfectly hand in glove with that. It fits perfectly in with everything we were saying about obsolete. And it fits perfectly in with these initiatives that Bill Gates has been supporting for a very long time through Microsoft and Gavi, this whole ID 2020. You've got the World Bank and all these other organizations, the UN and all that. They're all pushing for this, that this is a big 2030 sustainable development goal. And somehow now we have this novel coronavirus. And suddenly now we have the justification, the catalyst for bringing in all of these systems, UBI, the digital ID, whatever this vaccine is, I guess. Clearly, this is going to change everything pretty substantially. It is a huge acceleration of these agendas all coming together under what is basically this perfect storm that just seems way too perfect. So we just wanted to show this to you and talk about this because everyone right now is pretty anxious. And I mean, maybe you didn't want to hear about this, but I'm the kind of person that I'd rather know than just be fumbling around guessing at what might be going on. I'd rather know, even if it's a tough pill to swallow, even if it's not a tasty spoonful of medicine. I mean, when this article was put up on Instagram, that's where I first saw it. You had people going in there like, MIT, stop making clickbaity headlines for fear-mongering. That's not cool and all that kind of stuff. But MIT doesn't typically do clickbaity fear-mongering headlines. That's not really what they're about. I mean, this isn't the Daily Mail that we're talking about here.
But the thing is, the one asset we still all have is public perception. If the public in general don't swallow this medicine, then this plan won't work. So the best thing we can do is expose it for what it is. If people see it for what it is, if people say, enough of this, you're not going to control my life over a glorified flu, then maybe we can stave this off. Because, yeah, the agenda includes full-on digital ID. We did a major report how in the little tiny European country of Estonia, they've got digital ID, taxes, banking records, everything
all
tied to one ID.
One central place.
And that's basically what this is leading to here as well. It's a one ring to rule it all type of situation. I mean, think about how many other things could be affected if they wanted to make them penalties or conditions. If you haven't got the vaccine, if you haven't been cleared, well, maybe you can't do other things that don't even have to do with going out in public. Maybe you can't access your social media accounts or buy things on marketplaces that you want to do. Maybe your tax returns will be in question. All kinds of stuff could be used as dangling carrots and punishments, rewards and incentives and punishments and conditions to get people to comply with this. When you centralize that much power,
well, and
it's not something we should play around with.
And here's what they say at the end of this article, because it touches upon that at the very end. There's just a little bit left here. He actually straight up says, we'll adapt to and accept such measures, much as we've adapted to increasingly stringent airport security screenings in the wake of terrorist attacks. So he's straight up saying there, you guys took it, the stuff we did at the airports, making you guys line up and get felt up and walk through these body scanners and all this kind of stuff. You accepted that. And it says, the intrusive surveillance will be considered a small price to pay for the basic freedom to be with other people. And I just, mind-blowing that he wrote that statement, the basic freedom to be with other people, because they know straight up that isolation makes people crazy. It's a way of breaking somebody down to isolate people. Isolating people is one of the first things you do. Everybody knows the phrase cabin fever, So this intrusive surveillance, this new stepping up of the level this is going to get to, where privacy doesn't exist at all, will be considered a small price to pay for the basic freedom to be with other people.
I mean, it's horrifying, but at least it's an honest phrase. They're coming after the basic freedoms of people.
I mean, that's the most basic freedom that most people could even think of.
And by the way, back in the 70s, they had a swine flu. The public was all afraid. They got at least 50 million people to take the vaccine. Turned out it wasn't really that big of a deal, but...
Remember the swine flu scare of 1976? That was the year the U.S. government told us all that swine flu could turn out to be a killer that could spread across the nation. And Washington decided that every man, woman, and child in the nation should get a shot to prevent a nationwide outbreak, a pandemic. Well, 46 million of us obediently took the shot. And now 4,000 Americans are claiming damages from Uncle Sam amounting to $3.5 billion because of what happened when they took that shot. By far the greatest number of the claims, 2/3 of them, are for neurological damage or even death.
And they're rushing this thing through as fast as they possibly can. They already started testing it on someone Monday. So the article ends by saying, as usual, the true cost will be borne by the poorest and the weakest. People with less access to health care or who live in more disease-prone areas will also be more frequently shut out of places and opportunities that are open to everyone else. Gig workers will see their jobs become even more precarious. Immigrants, refugees, the undocumented, and ex-convicts will face yet another obstacle to gaining a foothold in society. which just makes it sound like there's going to be even more discrimination here, even more of a caste system that's being put in place in the new digital era. So it doesn't sound like things are going to get more fair under this at all. It sounds like things are just going to get worse in that regard to the inequalities here of the tiers of society. It says, moreover, unless there are strict rules on how someone's risk for disease is assessed, and this plays back into did you get a vaccine or not, unless there are strict rules on how someone's risk for disease is assessed, governments or companies could choose any criteria. You're high risk if you earn less than $50,000 a year, if you're in a family of more than 6 people, if you live in certain parts of the country, for example, which creates the scope for algorithmic bias and hidden discrimination. The world has changed many times and it's changing again. All of us will have to adapt to a new way of living, working, and forging relationships. But as with all change, there will be some who lose more than most, and they will be the ones who have lost far too much already. The best we can hope for is that the depth of this crisis will finally force countries, the U.S. in particular, to fix the yawning social inequalities that make large swaths of their population so intensely vulnerable.
And I love how they try to spin that it's going to be an egalitarian fairness for all. This is a sabotage on our quote-unquote basic rights as human beings. What it is, just like other global issues, it's a global problem. It's a global threat. It's invisible. It has no borders, and therefore it's going to insert global jurisdiction in places where it doesn't belong. It's going to violate basic freedoms protected under the Constitution and Bill of Rights in this country. And yes, it's happening around the world, but some of the strongest protections are here. They're whittling that away. They're finding a camel's nose under the tent because it's a global threat that has no borders. So therefore, the response will also have no borders. The response will have no limits on its jurisdiction. That's what keeps me up. It's so unnerving. And people are primed to consent to this. I hope they wake up.
And they've already got a series of articles out right now about how the coronavirus is harming globalization because it's making countries shrink back from each other and close their borders, and how bad this is for globalization. But really, ultimately, the response is what's going to propel globalization much farther beyond what we've seen, anything we've ever seen, just period. So, yeah, I hope people can realize what this is, because the thing is if enough people do not comply, then I don't think it will work. If enough people said no to this, but I think the problem you have with this, the way they've set this situation up, is again, you have this basically conditioning schedule of putting people through this panic again and again and again and again.
Would you believe a basketball playing chicken? Well, how about a chicken basketball player?
6 times, 7 times at least by the end of 2021. I mean, I think by the time you condition people in such a manner to just respond with this level of anxiety and fear, eventually it'll just be like Children of Men, and there'll be bombs going off and people won't even notice anymore. Brazil, Terry Gilliam's Brazil, right? It'll just be something like that. But I mean, this is nothing short of what looks like a conditioning schedule to me, to get people used to this new way of living, used to this new situation. And then I think once you have a year and a half of that, I think a lot of people might be more willing to step into this situation and accept it, where they definitely wouldn't have accepted it today, and they definitely would have accepted it at all a month ago. So
it's because they're using isolation as a weapon, and in war, that weapon is called siege, and it's been recognized as unhumanitarian. It's putting civilians in the line of military fire. They're not attacking them, but they're closing them off from supplies, from being able to go out in public to conduct their lives. That's what is being done.
I view it as in a sense, a wartime president. That's what we're fighting.
This matters going forward. We're in a live exercise here to get this right.
I have to say that our government is prepared to do whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, we're doing.
So we just wanted to put this before you for your consideration. Look into these things for yourself. Go watch some of the other videos that we've done on these kinds of technologies and topics, and the privacy and freedom concerns that we have about these systems. and make up your own mind about it. But I feel like people need to at least see that this is what is being talked about and considered by people in high places in the situation that we're now under. This is not a video that's being made to scare anyone. I'm not trying to scare anyone, but this is what is going on, and this is what is being discussed, and people need to know that this is what they're talking about doing, so that people have a chance to consider what is going to happen beyond the immediate threat that they keep just inundating us with information about all day long, every single day. There's a time beyond that, and that is what these people are discussing, and I think people need to know. So, anyways, we love you guys. Talk to you again soon.
What I will say of this virus, I think we're in the middle of a massive experiment worldwide. And that
where's the guinea pigs?
Maybe. The experiment is, will people listen to scientists? If we all paid attention to what scientists say, maybe the coronavirus will just blow on by and with a minimum of cases. And then we kicked its ass for obeying the recommendations of scientists on how to minimize your chances of getting it. That would be, it's an interesting experiment we're in the middle of.
Welcome to your future, a digitally interdependent, hyper-connected, networked world. Throw off the tethers of ordinary reality and join the digitized multitudes ruled by global e-governance. With your very own New World Citizen of the People's Federated Republic of the Great Democratic United Global States Incorporated chip card. Just one chip is now a key to every relevant database you are in on Earth. We're taking identification to a technocratic level beyond Aldous Huxley's wildest dreams and George Orwell's nightmares. One chip linked to your unique citizen number connects to all of your relevant societal business, including your passport, your driver's license, and all Federation-required licenses, titles, and registrations, your car, home, and medical insurance, all of your medical records, including your mandatory annual psychological evaluation, your DNA profile, and your prescriptions, your voter registration and history, and your bank account and digital universal basic income credits. But that's not all. Your blockchain-protected New World Citizen chip also gives you a digital footprint everywhere you go on the web, from online news sources to all of your social media accounts, authenticating you online to ensure a safe, peaceful, and secure society where no one can offend anyone else, because no one can hide. Continuous, real-time, 24/7 tracking and tracing will ensure a truly peaceful, digital utopia for all. No more fear of identity theft or forgetting those pesky passwords, as your digital citizen mark will be biometrically verified through your fingerprints, iris scan, EEG, voice print,
I'm sorry, Dave,
and facial map. From Cairo to Rome to Ingolstadt to Paris to Washington to Estonia and Astana. From ocean to ocean to ocean to heck, all of the oceans. Being a digital resident offers you a new concept of freedom to be a global citizen under your borderless digital new world order.
May be incompatible with faith and the actual definition of freedom. Databases wholly owned and operated by the People's Federated Republic of the Great Democratic United World States, Incorporated, and their subsidiaries. Your digital citizenship is legally binding, and data may be shared with third parties listed in subsection 187-C.2 without your express knowledge or consent. These terms and conditions are subject to change at any time, which is fine because they are 8,642 pages long and we know no one is reading the fine print. Travel allowed only in pre-approved, chip-validated mega regions and not including core or reserved sustainable development zones, as designated by the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. Online behaviors deemed negative or harmful are subject to UBI digital credit deduction without notice, up to and including account termination. See user agreement for further details.
Our smart grid network touches every corner of the globe.
It's one digital new world.
And your chip is your portal to it. So apply today.
To authenticate and secure your digital citizenship.
Because if you didn't do anything wrong,
you shouldn't have anything to hide.
And in this brave new world,
you won't be able to.